Alrighty, sorry about that delay, folks. Mobby. Uh, Dealing with power outages and their consequences is fun. Okay. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragathan. Today we have yet more Heavy Time by C.J. Cherryh. Last time, I honestly don't really remember what we did. Bum, 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 ba-dum, 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 bum, 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 bum. Right. Okay. So what had gone down was Bird, Ben, and Meg and Sal's rooms were raided by security, and that has freaked them out just a little bit. Just a tiny eensy weensy smidge. Um, and they're beginning to wonder, okay, what the hell's going on here? Nobody was having these problems until Bird and Ben showed up with that ship. What's that all about? Hmm. Meanwhile, Dekker continues to be the focus of a certain degree of investigation. Was the focus of the investigation, but then the higher ups called in and were like, "Yo, this woman wants this man's ass. They want him. She wants him like dragged down for justice. Uh, get rid of him. We need him out of our hair. We need him out of our hands. We cannot like just stop looking into it. Let the problem take care of itself. Pretend it doesn't exist." And unfortunately, the guy, and I forget his name, who's doing the investigating, is just like, okay, but it really doesn't look like he's responsible. Not Pain. Salvatore. There we go. Salvatore has to interface with Pain. Payne. Pain. Pain is the higher up, and he's younger than Salvatore is, and he's a muckety muck. He's in admin, and you know those admins, right? Right. Right? Well, at least in Aztecs, you know those admins. All this occurring is also like painted with the picture that, yeah, okay, there's a certain degree of serious corporate greed, shenanigans, and other such skullduggery. All right, so I'm definitely looking to get through chapters 8 and 9. My time is somewhat limited because I actually have to do work for a podcast. Yes, that's right. Chronerticals, which I should really start. I should. What's the word? Shilling? No. There's a nicer word than shilling that means the same thing. It'll come to me. My language centers for the last couple of days have been really fried. Um, words have come hard. Uh, no, there's a nice colloquial term for plugging. Plug. I should plug them. Because, like, I'm with them? Yeah. So I'll start posting links for them because they're worth it. I have to get a piece recorded for them, so I have to cut this one a little shorter than I'd like. Let me get to up to chapter 10 and then see how we're doing. I might wind up doing chapter 10 as well. A bunch of these chapters are a little bit short, so they're pretty manageable in the time I have available, although me getting a late start did not help due to the problems I was having before this. Okay, give me one sec to get some water swished around, and hope that I can remember the character voices that you know, that I set up. Because, like, I'm having a hard time remembering them, actually. We'll fake it. Let's see. Meg's a sweetie, but she's, you know. It was either that or, like, kind of a ghetto Irish, or bad Irish impression. Um, Ben Bird, yep. Okay. Sounds a little tricky. Okay, I have some new characters. That's another difficulty with a lot of CJ Cherryh's stuff is there are often lots of characters. So I'm like, I forgot this because, yeah, I remember. It's like, oh, not every book she does is Citeen, which is Geez, just the principles alone is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's easily 10. Easily 10. Um, oh yeah, more than 10. Plus voices I'd have to like say once and then completely forget existed for 300 pages and then have to start voicing them again. I love that book, by the way. I love Citeen. Citeen is brilliant. I'd love to read it aloud, but for starters, it's really long. I have kept most of the novels I've read to fairly short lengths. We'll see, though. Probably not this year. I am definitely going to get to Hellburner. Like, that's, for me, non-negotiable. I'm definitely doing that. Because it's the direct sequel to this, and, like, obviously, right? It just wouldn't be fair. It just wouldn't be fair not to. You know? You know. Okay. Okay. My rattling and rambling is done. Let's get this puppy cracking. Chapter 8. It was tests. Put the washer on the stick. Fit the pegs in the stupid holes. Add chains of figures. Dekker knew what they were up to when they gave him the kids' toys. Screw that, he said, and shoved the whole box onto the floor, wishing it was lighter G. But it made a satisfying racket. He looked up at the disconcerted psychologist and said, Screw all of you. I'm not taking your tests until I see a lawyer. He stood up and the orderlies looked ready to jump, the petite psychologist frozen, slate held like a shield. He coin flipped the washer he had in his hand, caught it before it fell, then tossed it toward the corner, looking at the orderlies. You want to come along? Tommy said. He was the one who talked. Yeah, he said, shrugged, and walked over to the door where Tommy and Alvy could take hold of him. They had worked it out. He walked and they didn't break his arms. He walked and they didn't break his arms. There we go. Better emphasis on the right syllable. Sorry, guys. And Goyles. Sorry, listeners. If he was quiet, they kept the restraints light, and he could keep his hands free. It was hell when you couldn't scratch. Vid, he said when they were putting him to bed. There was vid in this room. Tommy turned it on for him. He didn't even want to ponder where he'd been, what they were doing. It was just one more try, no different than the rest. But it scared him. Another doctor walked in, turned off the vid. He'd never seen the man before, but it was a doctor. He had the inevitable slate, the pocketful of pens and lights and probes, and a name badge that said Driscoll. Driscoll walked over, sat down on the edge of the bed. Don't get friendly, Dekker said. I'm not in the mood. He enjoyed seeing the bastard sit back and take on an offended surliness. He was down to small pleasures lately. Driscoll consulted his slate mysteriously. Or Driscoll was the one who had the memory problems. I understand your impatience, Driscoll said. I'll talk to a lawyer. We have your test results. You didn't run any test. Driscoll looked at his slate again. Impaired motor function, memory lapses. That's bullshit. Mild concussion, prolonged isolation, oxygen deprivation, exposure to toxic materials, a possibility of some permanent dysfunction. Bullshit. Inappropriate behavior, hostility. Get the hell out of my room. Where's Pran? Dr. Pran is on leave. I'm taking his cases. Driscoll made a note on the slate. I take it you'd like to get out of here. Damn right. I'll order the forms. I'm not signing any forms. Driscoll got up. reached the door, and hesitated. Try to control those outbursts, Mr. Dekker. Staff understands your problem, but it would be all around easier if you'd make an effort. For your own sake. Are the hallucinations continuing? Dekker stared at him. Of course not, he said. He thought, that's a damn lie. But it scared him. It pushed his pulse rate up. They'd turned off the beep, but that didn't mean they weren't listening, or that it wasn't going into storage somewhere. Eventually, a younger man came in, with another slate, walked up to the bed, and said, How are you feeling? The badge on this one said Hewitt. He hardly looked 20. He had a pasty, nervous look. Maybe they'd told him he was crazy. Dekker didn't answer him. He stared, and the young man said, I've got your release forms. He offered the slate. You sign at the bottom. I'm not signing this thing. You have to sign it. I've asked for a lawyer. I'm not signing that thing. Hewitt looked upset. You have to sign it, Mr. Dekker. No, I don't. You want out of here, don't you? They want me out of here. He was cold. The air conditioning seemed excessive. He thought if there was a pulse monitor going, it must be going off the scale. I'm not going to sign that thing. Tell them they can do it. They've lied about everything else. Hewitt hesitated this way and the other, said, in hushed tones, Just sign it. That's all you have to do. No. He shut his eyes, opened them again as Hewitt left. He wanted out of here. He no longer thought he was safe from anything here. But he didn't see a way. Rush for the door? If he got to the outside, especially if he hit anybody, the cops would have him on charges. God knew what. Sign the form and then go for a lawyer? A signed form was all that mattered to these people. It was all they listened to. And what kind of legal help was he going to get here? A company lawyer? Company witnesses? He'd had a brush with the law on Seoul Station. Kid stuff. He'd learned about lawyers. He'd learned about hearings. Judges went in with their minds made up. Another white coat came in, with a slate. This one walked up, held it out, and said, This is for your medical insurance. Sign it. He eyed the slate, eyed the woman suspiciously. It just authorizes payment of your bills. You're damned lucky you have it. You're 100% covered. He took it, looked at it. It looked legitimate. It listed him and it listed Corey. He signed the thing, and he remembered fighting with Corey, an outright screaming argument about that policy, saying, We don't need insurance, Corey. God, if you have an accident out there, that's it. That's all. It's a damn waste of money. And Corey had said, the college girl from just a different way of life than his, I've never been without insurance. We're at least having medical. I don't care what it costs. If we need it, it'll always be there. In the crazy way Corey did things, argue about a damn jacket and spend $1,000 a year on company policy that wasn't going to do them a damn bit of good. He started crying. He didn't even know why. The medic stood there staring at him a moment, and he put his arm over his face and turned as far over as he could. She left, but he couldn't stop. Tommy came in and said, Do you want a shot, Mr. Dekker? He grabbed his pillow and buried his face in it. So Tommy went away. Got something for you, Marcy Hager said in her office in records, with that peculiar smugness that Ben remembered. He came away from the doorframe. He had come to the records office on a cryptic drop by from Marcy. This after a nice bottle of wine that showed up with a buzz at Marcy's door some days past. You never paid Marcy's kind in funds, but you did want to be remembered. Marcy said, in a very faint whisper, "Got a little flag on your claims case. Seems Dekker's license has just been pulled." He pursed his lips. "Grounds?" "Doesn't say. Just turned up on the flag." "Hmm," he said. He winked at Marcy, said, "Thanks," with a little lift of his brows. "Big thanks." Marcy looked self-satisfied. "I did enjoy that." Meaning the wine, he was sure. But it didn't mean the wine paid everything. Marcy had her sights set on promotion, something to do with personnel. He didn't forget that. So, Dekker's license was being pulled. He walked out of the records, hands in pockets, reckoning what he knew and who he knew, and finally decided to stroll over to a certain small office in admin. Nothing much. Records. But Fergie Tucker worked there. Fergie was just plain bribable. "Hello, Fergie," he said, leaning on the counter. "How about lunch?" "The guy's got no license now," Ben said, over a sandwich in Io's flashing neon decor. You never could tell what you were eating in here. Everything flashed red and orange and green, and the music made the wine shake in the glasses, but Tucker liked it. "He's out on a medical. Psych, if you ask me. He was crazy, out of his head all the way back. Wait. Nope, that's Ben. Whoops. He's out on a medical. Psych, if you ask me. He was crazy, out of his head all the way back. No way in hell he was in control of that ship." Tucker took a drink. Strobe light turned the wine black, then flashed red on Tucker's face as he set the glass down. A jerky movement synced with the bass flutter down the scale. The wine shook. The air quivered. Tucker said, more loudly than he liked, "What exactly do you want?" "Expedition," he said, leaning close. "Huh?" Tucker said. Tucker's hearing had to be going. "Expedite," he said over the bass line. "There's no damn way he was in control. That's the law. He has to be in control or we own that ship." "I know the law." "Well?" Tucker shrugged and took a big bite of his sandwich, which left him sitting there while he disposed of it. Tucker had been a pig in school, and he was still a pig. But he was a high-ranking pig, and he could move data along if he wanted to. "Everything in order?" Tucker asked finally, when the mouthful was down. "That application's so clean it squeaks. Vid. Before, after, and during. Clean bill from the cops." "Court of inquiry?" This around a mouthful. "We haven't gotten any complaints. Nothing filed on us. Or him, maybe. But I know that title's clear. It's his. The partner's dead. Died out there. Sole title's with the guy. There aren't any other liens on it. We're it." Tucker's face was orange now, with moving shadows. Sitar run. Clash of cymbals. Bass and syncopation. "So what are we talking about?" "Just slip it ahead in the queue." Tucker swallowed. Said, slowly, "Has to have a grounds. Give me one." He said, carefully, "What's grounds?" and inclined his head as far across the table as he could get it. The music was on a loud stretch. "Where's this ship? What's its status?" "At dock. Life support's a mess. Tanks are blown. Filthy as hell, and the cops have it." "Chance of ongoing damage?" "Could be. Depends. Have we got a better one?" "Hardship." "On who?" "The claimant. Have you suffered damage?" God, it was so close he could taste it. "Financial?" "Any kind of damage? Can you document it?" "Yes!" He winced. The music vibrated through the tabletop. He held the explanation a moment, then shouted, "We spent our reserve getting that mother in. We're short at the bank. We couldn't lease our ship out when we came in because the cops had it impounded, and now we don't know what to do. She's past time she should have gone, you know. Here we are a good way through our heavy time, but she's sitting idle. We got crews stacking up, want a lease, and we need the money, but you only get a percentage on a lease if we do let her go out."
So, where's the hardship?
We could have we could have to be here because of legal questions on the other ship. We're trying to be in compliance with the rules, but we don't know which way to jump. We've already lost a big chunk of our capital, and we're scared to leave for fear of sending the whole deal out the chute. You understand what I'm saying? We've been waiting months already. We're coming to the time we should be out of here, and we can't be.
Yeah, Tucker said. You know, somebody else could even slip in with a bid and take that ship if word got out she was up for claim, if you weren't around to sort of oil the gears.
Tucker was a real bastard. He stared at Tucker, thinking, "Don't you think about it, you scum," while the music went from green to red and his blood pressure went up and up. "Yeah," he said, "but we are due a hardship."
Yeah, well, you know those things are hell to fill out. You'll have to use the right words, say exactly what the clerks around in claims like to hear. And you have to have somebody take it over there that can put it on the right desk.
"Guaranteed?"
Guaranteed.
Tucker's pig eyes looked him up and down.
Ship owner has collateral like hell. Never has anything in pocket. How are your finances running?
500.
5,000.
The hell? Tucker shrugged, slid his eyes away, filled his mouth with sandwich. The base fluttered up and down the scale. "All right," Ben yelled. Trinidad was free. That had come through this morning. Thank God. Ben nursed the beer to the bottom. Bird nursed the beer to the bottom, and the last lean froth. Wanted a second one, but the tab at the hole was already too high. August friggin' 15th, and Trinidad was still at dock. Meg patted his shoulder, went over to the bar. He figured what she was doing, then, and turned half around to protest, but Mike was already drawing the first one, and Sal Abujib laid her hand on his from his other side. "Beer's cheap," Sal said. "Let her buy this one. We owe you a few." He had a slate full of figures that wouldn't balance. Ben was still arguing about staying on. Des Green and Alvarez and a good many of the other independents who'd been in when they'd arrived had all checked out on runs, and he was trying right now to decide whether old bones could run the risk of shortening their own time here, or whether they should just lease Trinidad out to Brower and his mate and sit at base running up a sleepery and food bill. Or rather, running up sleepery and food bills. Maybe even lease her to Meg and Sal. Promise them the new ship if they got it. In that consideration, they were short of supplies, the bank was not cooperating, and the damned LOS never had turned up again. They could try one more thing to get recoveries to wake it up, but that computer time was expensive, and he just wasn't sure it was worth it. They'd had another minor LOS yesterday, not on one of their own, but on one they had a 15 and 20 on Peterson's lease, and he wished to hell he knew whether it was just bad luck, Peterson's fault, or whether there'd been any assignment in that sector when the thing went dead. The company just didn't like to hand out that kind of information. There were hotheads on Hell Deck that'd go for somebody if they got the wrongful or rightful notion they'd been robbed. Couldn't blame Mama on that one. Fights with chains and bottles were hell on the cops. So they took the second LOS, and they knew they were going to have to tighten belts, that was all. And he knew why Meg and Sal were moping around with him and Ben instead of outrunning down a lease or even hitting on them for Trinidad, when that would have been the logical thing. Hard at this point to tell them they weren't good enough to make enough to rate any prime lease. And they'd better go court somebody else, when Meg and Sal were courting them with all the finance they had, and they were, damn it, day by day, letting them do it, standing by them when anybody else would have called them fools. He'd told them more than once at the first. I gotta be honest with you, I don't think that ship of Ben's going to come through. Did that drive them off? Hell no. He should have said, plain and cold, Meg, I hear you're one hell of a pilot, and Sal, you're not bad at the numbers, but you just haven't got the years, haven't got the math, haven't got the sense of knowing how things work. Should have said, a long time ago, you two shouldn't ever have made a team. Two greenies in the same ship is never going to get better fast enough for what you want. But he knew what kind of slime spots they'd already shipped with before they'd proved on Trinidad that they could go it alone, and started getting leases. And Meg had courted him real hard just before Ben showed up with the cash and the schooling. He still flinched when he recalled having to tell Meg that, and Meg taking it real well, though she looked as if she'd got it in the gut. Maybe Sal even knew, and she and Sal had stayed teamed, even so. They'd take good mechanical care of a ship and bring her back sound and clean. Last lease he'd had with Hall and Brower, you couldn't say that. And they might do better with decent charts, and a little help from Ben. Sal and Ben were a close pair lately. Those who knew Ben might snicker, and those who knew Sal would never in a million years win a bet on what really went on for some of those hours in the room, which was Ben talking numbers, and Sohila Abujib ticking away with her rented comp, with her lip caught in her teeth, and this frown that would break glass. Sal could look madder than any individual he knew except Crazy Bob Crawford. Ben was hard to shake when he got an idea, but when it came to plain determination to make it, Abujib and Meg Cady both were right up there with the cussedest. We could do worse, Ben kept saying, when who to lease to had never been Ben's department, which just draws to lease. Wow. Okay, let's take the sentence from the top. One sec. Oh man. We could do worse, Ben kept saying. When who to lease to had never been Ben's department, just which draws to lease and which to work. But he couldn't say Ben was wrong, except today it came to him that they'd blown near 2 months here, and they only now got Trinidad free. He and Ben could go ahead and make a run. Yet here they both were, with karma piling up with the pair who'd stayed by them. He couldn't figure how he'd gotten into this, or when it had gotten too late. But when the cops had raided them and thrown Meg and Sal's stuff all over, that had been a real bad time to tell them shove off and forget it. It seemed a worse time this morning, with their account bleeding money and him into Meg for a beer. He knew he ought to say, coldly as he could, Meg, Sal, don't buy me a damn other drink this morning because you're not getting what you're after, and you're wasting your money on what isn't going to come through. But Meg set the mug down in front of him, patted him on the shoulder, and sank into the chair beside him. We got an idea, bud. You and Sal go out in the Trinidad. Ben and I stay here to keep that little application alive and take care of problems. We get us a little finance, put what Sal and I got in the pot with yours. Make sense? I got to say, was as far as he got toward a desperate, I don't think this is a good idea and I can't take your money, when a familiar step came up behind him and a hand slapped a paper down in front of him. His eyes must be going. For a moment it failed to make sense as what it was. A piece of real paper, with official print. And Ben, landing in the chair on his other side, grabbing his arm, shaking him, and saying, We got it! We got it, Bird! The ship? Of a sudden he knew it was a ship title. He'd handled Trinidad's, years ago, before he put it in the bank vault. It says 2210 Charlie. That's not the number. Same ship with the blown tanks. They renumbered it like she was new. New start. Everything. We can sell her or we can fix her. We got her, Bird. He felt a little dizzy. He took a drink of the beer. Meg grabbed his arm from the other side. Sal was on her feet, hugging Ben, and Ben was ordering drinks. "Wait a minute," he said. "Wait a minute. Free and clear?" "Free and clear," Ben said. "We got a few charges to pay, but hell, we got the collateral now." "What charges?" "We got 9K to pay, plus the dockage." 9,000? Administrative. It's nothing, Bird. Nothing against the value of that ship. Figure it. It's ours."
I don't believe it.
Ben pointed on the paper, where it said joint ownership, and both their names. That wasn't the terms of the split they'd always had, but hell, he thought, Ben had hunted down the forms. Ben had done the legwork. Ben had pushed the thing when he never thought it would happen. Mike came over. Mike heard how it was, and gave them a round of drinks on the house. The Hole never did that. But Mike did now. They had more than was good for them. Which was when Ben said how he'd heard Dekker was going to be in a hospital a long, long time. How he'd gotten his license pulled. Brain damage, Ben said.
Shit,
He said, suddenly sick at his stomach. "Hey, I told you," Ben said. "Dekker's a certified mental case."
they pull him all the way? Sal asked.
Ben shrugged. "Closest makes no difference. If he gets recertified, there's no way they give him a Class 1. D3 maybe, but no way he can ever be primary pilot. Ship's ours, on account of it was a tumbling wreck when we got it, and just because he was inside is immaterial. He was just baggage. He couldn't stop it, and he was in no shape to help himself."
Poor guy, he thought.
"Fact is," Ben said, "we still got a stack of bills against his account. And if he's gone for a long walk, he doesn't need the money. They'll just ship him out to the Motherwell. I got an attachment on his bank account." That was too much.
Now, wait a minute, Ben. We got the ship.
And the repair bills, and our fuel, and our dock time. And its dock time, don't forget that. They'll stick us with all those bills.
Unpleasant thought. And the cleanup inside, he said. God, have you got any figure that what that's going to cost?
"I don't know," Ben said, "but we can get our expenses back." He was disgusted with himself, being happy to hear that. Maybe there was a lot of disgust at the table. Meg and Sal had gotten real quiet. But Ben pulled out his pocket slate and started running figures. "What we can do, we do the repairs ourselves. We use the reserve cash."
Whoa, wait a minute. That's our private insurance fund.
"You don't have to think like that now. That ship out there's our insurance fund. We got flexible capital now, Bird. Sure, we want a reserve, but we got to get that thing in running order. We risk it now while it's still in this shape. We don't lease Trinidad."
Whoops, 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 whoops.
I conflated.
One sec.
"You don't have to think like that now. That ship out there's our insurance fund. We got flexible capital now, Bird. Sure, we want a reserve, but we got to get that thing in running order. We risk it now, while it's in this shape. We don't lease Trinidad this run. We can do that work in a month if we push it, and we build back our fund. It'll work."
Hell, he said. I don't know. This poor guy.
"It's not our problem," Ben said.
Ben.
Ben gave him a bewildered look.
We don't take anything more from that guy. That's flat. No more charges against him.
Ben didn't say anything for a moment. Ben looked as if he were worried about the objection, or confused. Finally, "Yeah, well, all right. But we're talking about a guy that may not make it out of the psych ward."
If he does.
"Yeah, if he does, fine. So we're all right. So we collect it, and if he gets out, we can stand a mistake. If not, who cares? Excitement got the better of him. He broke out in a grin and slapped Bird on the shoulder. We got it, Bird. We got it. We got it made. The guys went off to somewhere, talking about checking out prices on tanks. Happy, mostly. They all should be. Everything had worked. But Meg sat there with Sal turning her glass in a pointless circle, and scared for a moment that didn't clearly make sense. She wasn't superstitious, as a rule. Maybe she'd gotten to distrust a winning hand. It always seemed to be the big breaks that stung you, the ones that made you lose your sense of reality and pushed you to commit to big mistakes. Like the break that had had her believing that sumbitch back at Saul. No damn luck at all, she said. Poor bastard's head all up and down, isn't he? Good old mom bitch. Screwed him good.
Yeah, Sal said. Didn't Mitch say?
Suppose he is crazy.
Ben swears he is.
Brute bad luck for him.
Company'd only get that ship. That's who we're screwing.
That's the truth.
Bet Mom Bitch passes a reg real fast, says this can't happen again. Bet Mom Bitch never severely figured somebody'd get through the shit work and file all those forms. They don't count on us knowing how.
Ah, but they paid off. That proves mom bitch is honest, doesn't it? Then she'll pass her rule.
Sal gnawed her lip, tilted her head to one side, a clash of metal-clipped braids. That gives Mama credit for brains. That's never been proved.
That's the truth. True here, true everywhere.
Clink of glasses. Here's to one more poor bastard, Sal said. Up the corpse.
Yo, Meg said. Here's the regulations.
Stupidity, Sal said.
Inefficiency.
Venality.
Is that a division?
Right under the corporate president. Clink.
Is there somebody responsible?
Must be on Mars.
Sure ain't here.
A quiet snort, and a look in Sal's eyes that was dead serious. Screwed, Sal said.
Yeah, Meg said. But what's new? Maybe he'll get lucky. Maybe they'll ship him back to his zone, let him retrain.
Lay any bets? He could have friends there.
No takers,
Meg said, and stirred a water ring with her finger. Sal said, Worth a nudge. Meg looked at her then, and Sal made a little shrug, gave her a lift of the brows with this smug look in her eye.
You let it alone, you and your friends.
No worries, Katie.
Yeah.
Cold as ice, Sal was. But sometimes you got this feeling she was thinking of something that risked her neck, and she was breathing it in like an oxygen high. Sal was a shepherd's daughter. Sal was also an orphan, in one deep dive into the well. That was worth remembering, too. I kind of had to keep from laughing aloud when they dropped the here's to somebody responsible, must be on Mars line. Because they totally nailed it by accident. And yeah, okay. There is somebody responsible. They are on Mars. They happen to be the dead partner's mother. And they're upset. If memory serves, we don't learn a ton about the political situation on. Well, we've learned a lot about the political situation on Earth. You learn a lot about the political situation on Earth in Hellburner. There's like you're steeped in it. You don't really have a choice. Um, it's not avoidable. You get a sense of what's going on and how they're totally disconnected.
And again, I know I've mentioned this before, but like this helps set the stage for what goes down in the book Down Below Station, which is, like I've said before, kind of the fulcrum on which this universe sits. It's a pretty big deal what goes down because it sets the entire tone going forward. Alrighty. Chapter 9. They'd asked his shoe size at breakfast. Now they turned him out of bed, gave him underwear and socks that came folded, likewise a cheap little personals kit, a pair of brand new boots, black, and coveralls, blue, with fold marks all over, so he looked like a mental case. They let him shave himself this time, but his hair hung around his ears and down into his collar. He didn't even remember the last time Corey had cut it. He just stood there in front of the mirror, staring at a hollow-cheeked, wild-eyed stranger, and didn't understand what Paul Dekker had to do with this gaunt, crazy person. He didn't remember that small white scar on his temple, didn't understand how it could have healed so far without him ever knowing he'd gotten it. Tommy took him gently by the arm. He liked Tommy more than Alvy. Alvy just did his job. Tommy cared. Tommy always gave him that little moment to get his balance, that moment to figure out that he had to do what they wanted, because Tommy had his orders. But Tommy was never rough with him, and Tommy guided him now with a real concern for his comfort. "Where are we going?" he asked. Just down the hall," Tommy said. "It's all right, Mr. Dekker." "Not going to be any more tests?" "No, sir. Just down to the office." Things kept echoing in his head. He said, "Tommy, did they give me something?" "When they did the test this watch, yes, sir. Still a little groggy?" "Dizzy," he said. "Yes, sir. We'll just take this slow, all right? Good chance you're gonna be leaving this afternoon." That scared him. He thought, where to? Where is this place? They'd let him out and he'd be somewhere he didn't know, and Tommy wouldn't be there. Just strangers. Tommy opened a door for him and whoops, and brought him into an office. He didn't want to stay there. He didn't want to be alone with any more doctors. Tommy set him down in a chair, and he grabbed onto Tommy's arm. "Stay here," he said. Tommy patted his shoulder. "It's all right." The doctor was coming in from the other door, same stamp as all the others. Tommy had said the doctor's name, and he didn't care, he just wanted out of here. But Tommy stayed right there with his hand on his shoulder a moment, and when the doctor ordered him, Tommy left him there. "How are we doing?" the doctor said. "Screw you," he said. Couldn't muster any enthusiasm about it. He felt as if he was floating. "Don't like this place, do you?" That question wasn't even worth answering. He wanted to go back to bed. Wanted to watch vid or something. Or sleep. "Still having the memory lapses, Mr. Dekker?" He honestly didn't know. He shook his head. "I'm Dr. Visconti, outpatient services. Dr. Driscoll says you're doing much better." Maybe he was supposed to say something about that. He didn't. He just nodded. Visconti said, "There's an answer here from management on your request for a court of inquiry. Do you want me to read it to you? Do you want to read it?" "I'll read it," he said, and Visconti pulled a card from his pocket, slipped it into the slate that was lying on his desk, and offered it to him. It said, "Mary Finn, Special Judge, Legal Affairs Technical Division, R.E. Inquiry, Belt Management, Division 2, Mining and Recovery, Aztecs. Memo to Mr. Paul F. Dekker, C.O. James R. Reynolds Hospital, care of R2/Aztecs Mining, 8/01/23," as a date. "Dear Mr. Dekker, we have investigated your claims regarding the fatal accident that occurred on or about March 12th of this year. We enclose the testimony of 1. Recoveries, which has attempted to trace the course of 1-84-Z and to determine the location of the accident. 2. The testimony of Mohammed Fadi, Range Officer and Lyle Xavier Manning, Senior Captain of the ship Industry, which was the only ship of its class operating near that path. 3. The testimony of Francis E. Rodriguez, Chief of Operations of BCOM/R1. 4. The report of Gianpaolo Bellaporto, Chief Examiner, Aztecs R2 Div ECSAA. It is the determination of this office that a catastrophic failure of the main intake valve. Oh, that's interesting. That's misspelled. Of the main intake valve caused an explosion of the number 2 primary tank of 1-84-Z, which hurled the vessel in an unanticipated acceleration toward charted asteroid 2961. This is a damn lie. This whole thing is a lie. Mr. Dekker, there wasn't any catastrophic failure. Mr. Dekker, there was no driver in your vicinity at the time. The report doesn't find you culpable. It was a very unfortunate double system failure. The pressure in that tank was building up during your maneuvering while your partner was outside. The valve had failed. The warning should have sounded. There's no evidence it did. The blow-off apparently didn't function. That part of the tank is missing, and there's no way to check. What are you, a psych or a mechanic? It's part of our job, Mr. Dekker, to determine what did happen before we offer advice. The investigators didn't find any evidence of negligence, and they don't blame you in any wise for the accident. He shut up, just stared at the wall. Useless to argue. Absolutely useless. It simply wasn't your fault, you understand? It wasn't any one person's fault. There's going to be a thorough investigation at R1 Maintenance, but most serious accidents, they tell me, involve a triple failure, either of human beings or of equipment. As I understand it, the pressure warning didn't sound. They're sure of that from the log recorder. The blow-off can't have functioned properly. It says here they're investigating the possibility of a primary cause in a cross-wiring of a control module in an attitude control unit. The chance that the safety interlock system actually caused a pressure increase instead of a system shutdown. If it's any comfort to you, there's going to be a design review and a mandated inspection on that particular module. Whatever the technicalities, as the experts explain it, it was bound to happen at some point during a period of frequent brief firings. The investigating board thinks that when you were moving in to pick up your partner. Whoops. Wow, I misread that completely. My bad. Whatever the technicalities, as the experts explain it, it was bound to happen at some point during a period of frequent brief firings. The investigating board thinks when you were moving in to pick up your partner. So it's absolutely not your fault, Mr. Dekker. There's no way you could have detected the malfunction. No way you could have anticipated it. Nothing you could have done when it did happen. It's not a question of blame. And you've carried a great deal of personal blame, haven't you, Mr. Dekker? Anything you say, Doctor. It's called transference. A terrible experience, a long period of disorientation, periods of unconsciousness, guilt for what you didn't do. A driver accident is something every miner's afraid of, something you can't defend against, a shot arriving out of nowhere, faster than anything can warn you. A loss of personal control, just like that explosion. That fast. Corey's gone. Not Corey. Not Corey? What's the matter? Her being dead puts you on a first-name basis with her? Go to hell, Doctor. Of course you'd have protected her. You're still protecting her. But you have to accept you're not to blame. Something blew up. There may be culpability on someone's part, but it's not with you. There was a driver, but it was a sector away. It wasn't firing. The events you fantasized just didn't happen. They don't have to happen in order for you to be innocent. You have to turn loose of that fantasy. Your partner's gone. There's no chance she's alive now. There's no hope. There hasn't been from the first few hours after the accident. You have to give that up. You have to take care of yourself now, Mr. Dekker. It's a damn lie, he said. You haven't been here all the while, have you? They used to say there wasn't a driver at all. Now it's a different story. It's a different story, Mr. Dekker, because the records are kept by zones and by sectors. You are almost correct, but you are remembering a recent position. The mind will do that to you. There wasn't a driver in the vicinity. The BMO at R1 and here at R2 have compared records. They know your course now. They didn't at the start. Now they're sure the driver wasn't anywhere near the accident." He couldn't answer that. His hold on what had happened his hold on what had happened had become too precarious. He decided to keep his mouth shut before they argued him out of another piece of his memory. The doctor took the slate, put in another card. "Are you ready to get out of here, Mr. Dekker?" "Damn right I am." "You'll be an outpatient for a while." The doctor passed him the slate. "You'll have a prescription to help you sleep. I understand you still have trouble with nightmares. That's only normal. You have to work these memories out. You have to remember and deal with this tragedy. I think you understand that. But you will have the prescription if you need it." He reached forward and offered a stylus. "Sign the bottom of the document and date it." Dekker pushed the button, scrolled back. It said, "Agree to the findings here above stated." "No," he said, and shoved the slate at the doctor. "I don't agree." "You don't feel you're ready to be released?" The doctor didn't take the slate. It stayed in Dekker's hand, and his hand shook. He thought, if I sign this lie, nobody will ever pay for what they did. They'll have killed Corey, and I'll have run out on her. Finally, even I'll have run out on her. Finally, even I'll have run out. But if I stay in here, they'll make me crazy. They can tell any damn lie they want. What's justice? What's justice when there's nobody can call them liars? He set it in his lap, shaking so badly he could hardly write his name, but he signed it. His eyes blurred. He handed it over. "Can you say, right now," the doctor said, "at least maybe it was an explosion? Maybe it was an accident? Can you get that far, Mr. Dekker? Can you admit that now?" He nodded. "Mr. Dekker?" "Yes," he said. "Good," Visconti said, and took the data card from the slate and put it in his pocket. He got up from the edge of the desk. "Come with me, Mr. Dekker. I'll take you to dismissals." He got up. He hurt in every joint. He went out the side door and into a corridor he hadn't known was there. He only wished Tommy had been there. He would have liked to have Tommy with him. "Don't mind a little stiffness," Visconti said while they were walking. "I want you to walk. I want you to do low-impact exercises. You don't need any broken bones to complicate matters. No jumping. No jogging. If there's any pain in the back, stop. The card we're going to give you has all your prescriptions, with dosages and cautions. I don't have to warn you about calcium depletion, kidney stones, that sort of thing. The calcitonin regulators you're surely familiar with. What I've given you shouldn't have any interactions, but take any symptoms seriously. Follow the exercise routines I've laid out exactly, precise number of repetitions. If you don't, if you get any undue amount of sleep disturbance, see me. If you get blood in the urine, if you get sharp headaches, blurred vision, hallucinations, or pain in the chest, put that card in the nearest reader, punch 888, and don't leave that reader. An emergency crew will find you." 888. That's right. I'm your doctor of record. Don't hesitate to call me. They reached a counter in the hallway that stretched on toward the light. "This is patient Dekker, Paul F. Would you find his file and his belongings?" Visconti put out his hand. "Good luck, Mr. Dekker." Maybe it would have been braver to have told Visconti go to hell. But it might have landed him back in the other hall again, with more stuff being shot into him, and the doctor saying, "Are you still having those memory lapses?" He shook Visconti's hand and waited at the counter alone when Visconti went away. His legs were shaking. His ears were buzzing. He was afraid he was going to fall, and they were going to put him back into bed. So he sat down on a molded bench that made his back hurt and waited while someone at the window called his name. Waited until someone at the window called his name. They gave him his data card and wanted him to sign another release, that he'd received his personals and his card and his prescriptions. They handed him a bag of prescription bottles, and another sack that had his watch and his old coveralls and stim suit. He signed, and they wanted his card in the slot on the counter. He punched Validate. He punched Read to know what it would show him, and the reader screen showed two things valid: the Asbank account number and his insurance. It said it was August 15. It said, all active accounts are in process of transfer to Asbank R2 Division. And below that, pilot credentials invalidated. He couldn't move for a moment. The clerk said, Mr. Dekker? And asked if he was all right. He couldn't think. There was just a door to a lobby, a way out, and he took his card back, shoved away from the counter, and walked for the light. He had no idea where he was when he left the hospital. He only walked for a while down the wide beige hallways with no clear thought in his head, except that he was out of the hospital and no one had stopped him. But a cop did. The cop blocked his path and asked for his ID card, and he stood there scared they were going to take him back, while people in business suits walked past ignoring the situation. The cop inserted the card in his pocket slate, with that expression that said he had to be a thief at best, and if there was anything wrong on this whole deck he had to be a prime suspect. Then the cop, still with that dead expression, stared off down the way and said to no one he could see, Yeah, yeah, copy that, thanks. Then the cop gave the card back with marginally less chill and pocketed his slate. Just out of hospital, is it? Yes, sir. You need any help, Mr. Dekker? No, sir, I'm all right. Where will you be staying? Don't know. Hell deck. Trans is down that way, about 100 meters. You'll want the last car. About your fourth, fifth stop. Thank you, he said, and walked on in the direction the cop had pointed. Aztecs didn't want a spacer walking on their clean deck, fingerprinting their beige paneled walls. He understood the rules. He didn't even spit on the floor. He made it to the trans station, leaned on the wall, and waited till the trans showed up and the doors opened. People in suits got off. He stepped aboard, into an empty car, and sat down. One woman got on, sat down opposite, didn't look at him, even if there was nothing else to look at. The trans started up, whipped along to its next stop on the rim. Somebody else got in. Eventually, all the business types got off, and spacer and worker types got on. The screen said, Next stop 2, as the trans started off in the other direction and climbed. It would help if he could ask his way, but people didn't do that. People kept their mouths shut in the trans, the same here as at R1. Ads lit the info screen, advertising upcoming facilities. Music blared. The first stop listed mostly BM service offices. The second was commercial. The third listed sleeperies, gyms, bars, and that was where he got off, into the echoing noise of Helldeck. He wobbled a bit when he walked, but that wasn't unusual here, for one reason or another. He looked like a lunatic, and carried plastic sacks full of everything he owned, and that wasn't unusual here either. Ordinary Helldeck traffic. Some religious type jostled him, a religious type who yelled something about God and judgment and aliens and wanted him to come and hear a tape. But he didn't. He just wanted to be let alone, and the guy told him he was going to hell. For a while, he was just lost. He could believe there had never been a hospital. There had never been a wreck. Everything around him sounded and felt like home base for the last 2 years. But the names were all different. Corey had never existed here. His eyes and his ears kept telling him he had finally come home, but people around him were busy with their own lives, in shops with different names. He walked, going through the motions people who belonged here went through. He didn't know what he wanted. His knees and his feet and his shoulders began to ache with the unaccustomed exercise, and he recalled, out of the long nightmare of the ship, that he had wanted a beer very badly then. So, in the process of picking up his life, he walked into a comfortable looking bar. The Pacific, it said, with plastic colored fish and plastic coral reefs and blue lights over the bar. The customers, there were 10 or so, were tenders and dock monkeys mostly. The shapes and shadows of creatures he'd never seen reminded him vividly of Saul's station, where he had a mother who honestly might care if she saw the mess he was in. She'd say, "Paul, didn't I tell you so? Didn't I say you were being a damned fool?" She'd say, teary-eyed and exasperated beyond endurance, "Paul, now, how in hell am I going to get you out of this one? You cost me everything I ever got in my life. You've done every damn thing you could to screw up. What am I supposed to do for you now?" But he'd have been drafted if he'd stayed on the station. No essential job, 18, no medical reason not, they'd have taken him. And she hadn't wanted that either. They'd agreed on that. She'd kissed him goodbye, and he'd been embarrassed and ducked away, the last time he'd ever seen her, humiliated because his mother had kissed him in public. He understood now how he'd been a pain in the ass, and after all the grief she hadn't deserved, the last thing Ingrid Dekker needed was her grown son calling up saying he was coming home, to get sucked up by the military after all, if they wanted a certified skits. So what the hell good could they do each other? He wouldn't take any more of her money, or her peace of mind, whatever it was now, and she couldn't help him. He ordered a beer and handed the bar his card, hoping the hospital hadn't cut off alcohol. Not good for a man on trank, but he didn't care. The bartender looked at him and stuck the card into the reader, where he could find out as much as a bartender needed to know, namely, could he pay for what he'd just ordered? Had he any active police record? A medical showed up. He could see the screen from where he was supporting himself on the bar. But the guy didn't argue about the beer, just drew one and gave it to him. Just drew one and gave it to him, and he found himself a vacant booth and fell into it, sipped his beer, shut his eyes, and sat there a while in relative null before his brain started to conjure pictures he didn't want to recall. So he looked at the stuff the hospital had given him, took his watch out of the bag and put it on. It said 060623, 15:48:10, 15:48:11. He watched the seconds tick along, thought, no, that date's not right. It's August. August 15. Corey's somewhere out there. All that black. All that nothing around her. She'd have seen the explosion, seen the ship. It could have run right over her. Damn it, no. She wouldn't have, because that wasn't what had happened. That was the doctor's story. There wasn't any bad valve. There'd been a driver. He'd argued with it. This is our claim. Hear us? Instruments went crazy, collision alerts sounding. He yelled over and over again, A-20, Mayday, Mayday, my partner's out there. You damned ass, what do you think you're doing? He ground the heels of his hands into his eyes, thinking how the log would show those instrument readings. The doctors kept saying something different, but maybe the cops hadn't even gotten into the ship. The doctors wouldn't know shit about the technicalities, and they didn't care. They just made up stuff they thought was going to shut him up. It was their job, and they didn't want him complicating it. The way the company worked, the cops probably hadn't even looked either. Just some judge took all these reports from a driver that didn't want any record of what it had done, and operators in BM who didn't want to admit a driver had jumped a claim. His head ached with a vengeance. He shied away from the company's reasons. He thought about the pills and sorted through the lot, reading labels. But beyond that, he looked at the time again. August 15th. The accident. No accident, damn it. That was the 12th of March. March 12 to March 31 is 20 days. 20 plus 30 in April is 50. 50 plus 21 in May is 71. January 1 to March 12. 31 days in January, 28 in February. They said it wasn't a leap year. 12 in March, 31 and 28 and 12 makes 71 days. 71 days till they found me. 71 days from January 1st to the accident. No, from the accident. That was why the watch read out the 12th. The numbers are a match, that's all. And between then and now, is it coincidence? Or do months always do that? What do 30s and 31s have to do with anything sane? He couldn't think. His mind slid off any long track it tried to take. It made his head ache. He took his data card and used its edge to reset his watch. August. The 15th. That was it. It said August 15, and Corey was out there somewhere while he was sitting in an R2 bar. Half a year was gone, part of it lost in the dark, part of it on the ship, part of it in hospital. The 15th of August. And his card was active here, on R2, and they hadn't said a word about sending him home. He supposed they didn't want the expense. Or they didn't want him talking. Screw that. If he knew anyone to tell anything to on Helldeck, if they'd gotten his ship in, if he had anything to live on. He remembered the license suspension. The doctors said it was oxygen deprivation and nerve damage because he dumped a stupid box on the floor and pissed off some doctor with an attitude. That was what had gotten written down on his records. Or they'd pulled it because of the accident. But they'd cleared him of that. He could fix the license part of his problem. Blech. He could fix the license part of his problems, get the shakes out, get some sleep, and do a few days in the gym. All he had to do was sign up and pass the operationals again. No problem with that. Except the hours requirement. The company was going to be reasonable? The thought upset his stomach. Retake the medical exam, maybe. Put the damn washers on the stick this time. He could prove it never should have been pulled. Getting the ship in order might take everything he had. Tanks blown, all that crud when the life support went down. But he could do a lot of the cleanup himself. But the dock charges, they'd come in when? July 26th? June 26th? God, he didn't want to think about time any longer. Didn't want to add numbers or sweat finance right now or figure out how much he'd lost. But now that he'd started thinking about it, he couldn't let go. He couldn't keep any figures straight in the state he was in, and he had no idea what the tanks were going to cost. 20, 30,000 apiece, maybe, counting the valves and the controllers and hookups. Some value for the salvage on the old ones, but it was going to take bank finance, and they had his account tied up. It might be smarter to sell it, buy in on some other ship. The bar had a public reader. He got up with his beer, and his bag of pills, and his belongings, and went and put his card in, keyed past the surface information for detail this time. Application made for funds transfer. 47,289.08 in Asbank R1 branch to Asbank R2. Accessible after 60 days. Public notice posted 08/15/23. Current available balance 494.50. 60 days. God, what could take 60 days? He wanted to know where his ship was, what berth, what those charges were so far. He typed 1-84-Z. Status. R2's computer answered. Unavailable. Screw-ups. There wasn't a thing in his life that some damned agency hadn't messed up. He took his card, went back to the bar, said, "Can I use the phone?" The bartender held out his hand. He surrendered his card for the charges, and the guy waved him to the phone on the wall at the end of the bar. He punched up information, asked it dock office, pushed call, waited through the dock authority recording, pushed option 2, and patiently sipped his beer while his call advanced in queue. A live human voice finally acknowledged, and he said, "I'm Paul Dekker, owner of 1-84 Zebra. Should be at dock. I'm getting an unavailable on the comp. Can you tell me what—" "Confirm, Oneer?" "Yes, towed in. Might be in refit." "Just a minute. You say the name is Dekker?" "Paul Dekker." "Just a minute, Mr. Dekker." He took another sip of the beer, and leaned heavily on the counter, his breath gone short. He'd had enough of incompetence, damn it. He'd had enough of doctors arguing with him what he had and hadn't seen, and he wasn't ready to start around with dock authority. A ship way outsize was a damn difficult object to misplace. Mr. Dekker, that ship was here. I'm not finding any record of it. Just a minute. A long wait while he sipped his beer and his heart pounded. Mr. Dekker? Yes? Are you sure that ship hasn't gone out? He was on the edge of crazy now. He said, I'm an owner-operator. No, it hasn't gone out. It shouldn't have gone out. Try refit. I'll check. The operator sounded concerned. Finally. The barman was looking at him. A bunch of military drifted in and took his attention. He hadn't seen them on R1, but they were customers. He was glad of the distraction. He was in no mood for a bartender's questions. The bartender served the other drinks. The hold continued. The soldiers settled in at a table. The barman signaled him. Refill? He slid the empty mug down the bar, still waiting, still listening to inane music. Mr. Dekker? The phone said. Yes? I'm going to put my supervisor on. Please hold. He had a bad feeling. A very bad feeling. The beer came sailing back to him, and he stopped it and sipped at it without half paying attention. Mr. Dekker? A different voice. Older. Yes? Mr. Dekker, that ship's number was changed. I'm looking at the record right now. You're Mr. Paul F. Dekker? Would you confirm with your personal ID, please? 12-9078-79. Yes, sir. That title was transferred by court order. It was claimed as salvage. He couldn't breathe for a moment. He took a drink of the beer to get his throat working downward again. Mr. Dekker? Did the guy who claimed it happen to be named Bird or Benjamin something? I'm not supposed to give out that information, Mr. Dekker. I can give you the case number and the judge's name. If you have a question, I'd suggest you go to the legal office. We don't make the decisions. We just log what they tell us. I'm very sorry. Yeah. He was having trouble with his breathing. He didn't have his card to take the note the dock office was putting in. He didn't want to involve the barman to get it. It went wherever it went when you didn't key a capture. What? Oh, he didn't want to involve the barman to get it. It went wherever it went when you didn't key a capture. Thanks. Good luck, Mr. Dekker. The dock authority hung up. He pushed the flasher, keyed up information, and keyed into registry. Took the one choice this time, and asked the robot for M. Bird. Bird, comma, space, Morris L. 2-29T, berth 29, and 2-210C in refit. He signed registry off and keyed up information on Maury Bird. It gave a can be reached at phone number. He called it. The voice that answered said, Black hole. Is this a sleepery? Sleepery and bar. Help you? He hung up. He drank a big gulp of beer and picked up his sacks off the bar. He asked the barman, Where's the black hole? About 3 doors down. Something the matter, mister? Yeah, he said, and left. I'd heck with it. We will do chapter 10 as well. Sorry. Actually, how long is chapter 11? 6. ish. 26-ish. How long is chapter 12? Sorry, give me a minute. Yeah, I can work with that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Chapter 10. Heavy Time was, for a very major thing, a desperate chance at all the vids you'd missed, at food that supply services hadn't blessed, at faces you wouldn't see day after day for 3 months, and at the news you didn't get out there where Mama's newscast was the only gossip you got, telling crap like gas production R2 is up 0.3%, or there was a minor emergency in core section 12 today when a hose coupling came loose, releasing 10,000 liters of water. The mind conjured intriguing images, but they were thin fare to live on. Heavy Time was real life. The reviews Mama radioed you out in the deep belt of vids in the top 10. What? Oh, yes. Heavy Time was real life. The reviews Mama radioed you out in the deep belt of vids in the top 10 only let you know what was a must see when you got back. A stale rehash of handball scores was no substitute for seeing the interdivisional games, and electronic checkers with your shipmate was damn sure no substitute for sex. Heavy Time was anything you could afford besides your hours in the public gyms and your socializing in the sleeperies and bars and your browsing in junk shops. Precious little you could buy except consumables and basics, because a miner ship had no place to store unusefuls, and mass cost fuel. But experience didn't mass much except around the waistline, so those were the kind of establishments you tended to get on Hell Deck, those that catered to the culturally, sexually, and culinarily deprived. And if a couple of your partners turned up absent since quitting time into supper with a sudden lot of credit in the bank, you knew it was probably one of the above. Even if it left you doing the supply shopping and handling the guys wanted a lease, Whoops. Even if it left you doing the supply shopping and handling the guys wanting a lease, you couldn't blame him too much, and Bird didn't. Ben had never been inclined to do it. Ben had worked hard on the legal stuff and the filings, and Ben had finagled a deal with a company repair crew to get the tanks installed. But leaving him with the phone calls. The regular lease crews wanting a piece of Trinidad or way out. Those you could explain to. They weren't overjoyed, but they understood. It was the horde of part-time, unpartnered would-be's, most of whom you wouldn't trust to find their way up the mast and back, who called up every time a ship went on the list, and who, finding out that Trinidad, newly on the list, wasn't to lease, argued with you. And, worse, that a brand new ship, way out, was already first let to one Cady and Abujib, of less seniority and a certain reputation. Well, it told you that you sure didn't want to lease to those hotheads anyhow. He said to the latest such to call, "Screw you too, mister. Hell, if you ever get it. Whoops. Screw you too, mister. Hell, if you get on any ship I'm handling," and hung up. After which he walked past the looks from the other tables, back to the table by the door and the figures he was working with, Meg. Bills and bills this week, pieces and parts of Way Out, mostly. He sat down and shook his head. "Another fool," he said, and punched up the Restore on the slate beside his plate, trying to recall his previous train of thought, and wishing to hell they still gave you paper bills instead of damn windows on a slate that caught the glare from the ceiling lights. "Wayland Fleming. I never let to that son of a bitch, and now I'm damn. Wow, I'm having a hard time today. Wayland Fleming. I never let to that son of a bitch, and right now I'm damned glad. Where in hell's Ben and Sal off to, anyway?" "Vid, I think." "Spending money." He shook his head. "I don't know what's got into Ben." Meg looked up with raised eyebrows and said, Now, Bird, you know what's got into Ben. No, he honestly hadn't. No, he honestly hadn't had it figured until Meg said that, and it somewhat upset his stomach. Ben and Sal? Cold, cool Ben? With Sal Abujib? You didn't have it figured? Meg said. Come on, Bird. That they were sleeping together, hell yes. Going at it non-stop, absolutely. But that was youthful hormones. What Meg implied was something else. A guy like Ben, who'd saved every penny all his life, outspending it on a woman? Ben, his best ever numbers man, being courted by Katie's? And advising him who to lease to, against his better judgment? Meg had toted up the expense figures while he was at the phone. She had a better head for bank balances than he did. She was damn pretty, and sometimes, looking at her, even if an old blue skier's eyes had to get used to fire red hair shaved up the sides and bangles up the ears, it was the likes of Meg that could keep a man interested in living. But what he was doing suddenly sleeping. Wah. But what was he doing suddenly, sleeping steady with Meg Cady, when there were whole stints ashore he'd spent without a woman so much as looking at him? And what was Ben doing spending his money on Sal? He was afraid he did have the answer to that, and maybe he ought to by rights be mad. Whoops. And me. These sentences aren't easy to begin with, okay? Jeez. He was afraid he did have the answer to that, and maybe he ought by rights to be mad. Maybe he ought to throw Meg Cady out on her scheming ear and rescue Ben from Sal's finagling. The problem with that scenario was a hand landed on his shoulder, jerked him around and out of his chair. A fist sent him back over the table. He had his foot up to stop another attack, but he knew the wild-eyed lunatic that was standing there wobbling on his feet. Everybody in the room was out of their chairs. Meg had hers in her hands. Mike was probably calling the cops. And Dekker was standing there looking as if standing at all was an effort. "Where's my ship?" Dekker yelled at him. Bird got a cautioning hand up before Meg could bash him. "Ease off," he said, and yelled at Mike Arezzo, behind the bar. "It's all right, Mike. I know this crazy man." "You're damn right you know me," Dekker said. "I get out of hospital, I call the doc to get my bills, and what have I got?" The jaw wasn't broken, but teeth could be loose. He rolled off the table and staggered to his feet with Meg's hand under his arm. "Is this Dekker?" Meg asked. "This is Dekker," he said. "Sit down, son. You look like hell." "I've been there." Dekker caught a chair back to lean on, getting his breath. "You damned thief." "Easy. Just take it easy." "Easy. You went and stole my ship, you lying hypocrite." It wasn't a kind of thing a man wanted to discuss in front of neighbors. Mike Arezzo asked, from over at the bar, "Want me to call the cops, Bird?" At tables all over the room, a lot of people were listening. "I'm not having my place busted up." "Why don't you?" Dekker gasped. "Prove 'em crazy this time so you don't have me to deal with. They can do the rest of the job on me. That's what you wanted, isn't it? That's what you set up for me. You took everything else. Why don't you just finish the job?"
Mike, I'm buying this guy a drink. I want to talk to him. He's all right.
"I don't want to talk to a damn thief."
Beer, Mike. That's what he's been drinking. Sit down, Dekker. Sit.
Dekker breathed, still leaning on the chair. "I need those log records. Just give me the log records. That's what I want."
I don't have 'em, he said.
And when Dekker just stood there looking at him,
She was cleaned out when they turned her over. God's truth, son. They're not going to give somebody else's log over to anybody else. I don't know if they got it stored somewhere, but her whole tape record was clean when she came to us. Zero. Nada. Everything's out of there.
Dekker was absolutely white. The damn company killed my partner. They're saying there never was a driver near us. They erased my log. Kid, shut up and sit down. You know that driver was out there. You know that the truth was what the truth was before they changed it. Meg pulled at his arm. Bird, ease off, Meg. Just sit down, son. People were headed for the door. People were clearing the place. Dekker slumped against the chair back, bowed his head, shaking it no, and Abe Persky said, brushing up close on his way out, "Not bright, kid. Understand?" Abe left. Mike was pissed about his customers and the noise. He brought the drink over and said, "Shut this guy up. We don't need this kind of trouble in here." "We got him," Meg said, got Dekker by the shoulder and steered him for the chair. "You just calm down, here. Bart's not a thief." "The company's the thief. You just—" Meg said, "Shut it down. Just shut it down, June Fee. We hear you. Listen to me. Sit fucking down." Dekker fell into the chair, caught his head against his hand, in an ambient quiet even the Hole's music couldn't drown. "Dunno if you ought to have this," Mike said. "I give you guys a break and you give me a crazy?" Dekker said, looking up, "I'm not crazy." "Them's the ones to watch," Mike said, and set the beer down. Dekker was honestly sorry he'd hit Bird. It was Ben he wished he'd found, before the cops came and got him. He might have killed Ben, and that might have satisfied him. But Bird had told the bartender not to call the cops, for what good that would do. The red-haired woman had made him sit down at their table, and they gave him a beer he didn't need. God, his head was pounding. His eyes ached. The two of them, Bird and this woman with the red hair, who might be a shepherd, sat at the table with him and told him how the company would have taken everything he owned anyway, how he had to be smart and keep his mouth shut, because he was only making trouble for people who didn't have any choice. "So what have I got?" he asked. "Hush!" Bird grabbed his wrist, squeezed hard, the way Bird had done on the ship, telling him to shut up, to keep Ben from killing him, and his nerves reacted to that. He believed in Bird's danger. He believed in Bird's advice, the same helpless, stupid way he'd found himself from one moment to the next believing what the doctors told him, and he knew then he was lost. He said, pleading with Bird for help, "They're lying to me." Bird whispered, "Hush, hush, boy. So they're lying. Don't make trouble if you have any hope of getting that license back." He didn't remember he'd told Bird about his license. He couldn't even remember how long he'd been sitting here, except his hand stung, which told him how long ago he'd hit Bird. Holes in his memory, the doctor said. Brain damage. "Whatever's happened," Bird said quietly, still holding his arm, leaning close. "Whatever's happened, son, we're not against you. We want to help you. All right?" He was alone in this place. He didn't know anybody on R2 but Bird and Ben, a handful of doctors, and Tommy. He sat there with Bird holding his wrist and keeping him anchored in reality, or he might go floating off right now. Bird said he wanted to help. Nobody else would, here. Belters didn't, and he couldn't get back to R1. Couldn't go back home without Corey, even if they'd send him. Their friends would say, "Why did you let her die? Why didn't you do something?" And all those letters waiting from her mother. "Guy's gone," the woman's voice said. "He's on something." Bird shook his arm. "Dekker, you on drugs?" "Hospital," he said. He was staring at something. He could see a haze. He had no idea why he was staring, or how he was going to come unlocked and move again, except if Bird would realize he was in trouble and bring him back. Bird said, "Dekker?" "Yeah?" "Look, where are you staying?" That question required some thinking. It brought the room a little clearer. "I don't know," said, asking himself if it mattered at all. But Bird shook at his arm, saying, "Listen, you're pretty fuzzed. How are you set? You got any funds?" He tried to think about that, too. Recalled the 60-day delay, when he'd been on R2 longer than that, damn it, and he didn't know why the bank had waited till he got out of hospital to start transferring his account. He had no idea how he'd even bought the beers a while back. He had no idea how 500 odd dollars had arrived in his account, whether it was his or whether he just didn't remember. Bird said, "We could put you up a few days. Not that we owe you, understand. Let's be clear on that. But I don't really blame you for coming in here mad, either. Maybe we can work something out. Put the arm on a few guys that might help. You understand what I'm saying?" It sounded better than Pran or the rest of them had offered, better than the cops had given him. Bird had always seemed decent. Bird was the one who'd told him about the driver. "Out there," he whispered, trying to turn his head and look Bird in the eyes to gauge his reaction, but he couldn't manage the movement. "Out there. You saw. You remember what happened." Bird closed down harder on his wrist, numbing his fingers, hurting his arm, reminding him Bird had another face. "Better you concentrate on where you're going, son, and not think about anything else. You can't help your partner now. She's gone. Best you can do is get yourself clear. You think about it. Your Corey would want you to use your head, wouldn't she? She'd want you to be all right. Isn't that what she'd say?" That made him mad. Nobody had a right to put words in Corey's mouth. She'd hate it like hell. But he couldn't get back from where he was. He said, staring off into nowhere, "Screw you, Bird." "Yeah, well," Bird said, "try to help a guy." Another hand landed on his arm, pulled him around until he was looking at brown eyes, shaved head, dark red crest. Rab, Rad, Shepherd, or whatever she was. He didn't know. He was fascinated. Wary, too. He'd been Rab once, but Corey hadn't approved. Corey was too frugal, too Martian to waste money, she'd say, or to waste effort on the system, even screwing it. That senator, Broden, saying when they'd opened fire on the emigration riots, "No deals with the lawless rabble." News flashes when he'd been, what, 10, 12? First real political consciousness he'd ever had, seeing people shot down, blood smeared on glass doors. Rab's style and Rab fad was one thing. Shepherd's wore it modified. He guessed because it annoyed the exec, and they would. But this one, extreme as she was, with marks of age around her eyes. "You're from Saul Station," the woman said, "right?" "Yeah." She stared at him a long time. It felt like a long time. She might be thinking of trouble. Finally, she said, her hand having replaced Bird's on his wrist without his realizing, "Severely young, severely stupid, cher jeune... Whoops. Severely young, severely stupid, cher jeune fille. Company'll chew you up. Bird's all right. If Bird's telling you, you do. Or are you looking for Mom Bitch to save you? That's fool. That's sincerely prime fool, pretty petty cher." Rab speak from years ago, from before Corey, from a whole different life. Rab fad had turned into respectable fast fad, except if you didn't get it out of the trend shops, except if you were truly one of the troublemakers. Dress like that on Helldeck was a statement. A code he couldn't cipher anymore. Not what the colors were, what the earrings said, what the shave job tied you to. Like this woman, who looked him in the eyes and talked to him as if she saw what he had been before Corey. A damned fool wearing colors and politics he hadn't then known the meaning of. A stupid kid, scuzzing around the station. No aims, nothing but mad and trouble on his mind. Screw the system, make trouble, get high on the outside chance of getting caught. He'd been so smart then. He'd known everything, known so much he'd gotten himself arrested, tracked into the system as a juvie out of parental control. Himself and his mother tagged for deportation to the well, till his mother paid everything she'd saved to get them both bailed out. God, Paul, you've been nothing but a disaster to me. You've done nothing but cost me from the time I knew I was carrying you. Then they'd put him in a youth program, special studies, writing letters to kids on Mars. My name is Corey. I live at Mars Base. Hear me, June Rab? Do you read? He said. Yeah, I hear you. Good, Meg said, patted his face and looked away at someone else. Kid's gone out. B is not a good idea. Someone else came up close beside him. He could hear the footsteps. Not doing real well, is he? He didn't know that voice. Kid's a little buzzed. That was Bird. Something hit his face, jolted him. Deck, me lad, pay attention. This here's Mike Arezzo, owns the hole. Kid's had a bad break, just out of hospital. This is the guy, huh? He could see this Mike when Mike moved back past Meg's shoulder, but he couldn't recognize him. He was only sure of Bird. Then there was another voice he knew. What in hell's going on here? His heart turned over. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. Ben was on him, saying, Call the cops. Get this guy out of here. And Bird said, Calm down, Ben. Just calm down. Ben was going to kill him. He still couldn't move. Another voice said, clear and female, Dekker, huh? Dark-skinned face. Hand holding his jaw, turning his head, making him look her in the eyes. Scuzzed out, the dark woman said. She had 1,000 braids clipped with metal. She was right. He was entirely scuzzed out. He said, dim last try at sanity, Trank. Hospital. Beer. She said, Fool. Jack Malinsky had grabbed Ben's arm, him and Sal out shopping the deck, just walking home. Malinsky had said, Ben, some guy just pasted your partner down at the hole, talking wild about that ship you got. He'd run. He'd outright run getting here, Sal racing along with him. Gotten here out of breath. He'd thought it was some guy mad about the lease list. But they got to the door of the hole, and it was Dekker, no question. Dekker, sitting in a chair at their regular table, and Bird getting up to grab his arm and pull him aside before he hit the bastard. I got to talk to you, Bird said, and when he said it that way, Ben had this sinking feeling he knew exactly what Bird was going to say in private. Bird with his damned stupid guilt about that ship. Bird said, Dekker's a little upset. They turned him out of the hospital. Fine, let's call the cops. He's all right. The guy's just at the end of his tether. Tether's snapped, Bird, for God's sake, a long time ago. Nothing we can do. Nothing we're qualified to do. Give him a chance, Ben. Guy's just mad. Mad and upset. Homicidal is what he is. No. No. He is not. Come on, Ben. Come on, hell. Your mouth's a mess. Bird blotted his lip with the back of his hand, looked for traces. Can't say I blame him. Guy's lost his partner, lost his ship, lost his license. It's not our fault. Ben, I got to look at myself in mirrors. You understand? It's not our fault, but it's not like we didn't get something from him either. That's life. Ben, Bird looked utterly exasperated with him, as if it was his fault. Bird just closed off from him again. He had no idea why, and it upset him. He knew he wasn't likable. There weren't a lot of people who had ever liked him, while other people got what they wanted just by the way they looked. Dekker was one of those people, the sort that scared him when they got anywhere near somebody he liked. Damn it, he had everything he owned and everything he wanted tied up in Bird. And in Sal. and he was willing to fight for it if he could figure out how to do that, or go along with it, or pull strings in admin, use whatever points he had to get the guy back in hospital. Bird had his shoulder to him, looking mad, watching the table where Meg and Sal were both making over Pretty Boy. You could figure. Women would, though he'd remotely hoped Sal had better sense. He gritted his teeth and said, Bird, just what do you want to do? Just. Bird was still upset. But Bird did look at him. We got a chance to help the guy. Doesn't cost us much. Give him a chance to get his bearings and get his records in shape. You can pull those strings. You know how. It hit too close to what he was already thinking, in a completely opposite direction. Look at him! He cried. The guy's gone. He's off the scope. You're thinking about financing him? By God, Bird! Not finance. Just get him introduced around, get him a start, maybe get him partnered up with somebody decent. We don't know what happened to the last one. Nobody damn well knows, Bird. Bird caught his arm and leaned close, saying, half under his breath, Cut it. We know it wasn't his fault. He said under his, We know what he said, but he hasn't made a whole lot of sense. That's the trouble, isn't it? For God's sake, Ben, give the kid a chance. You said yourself, if we got the finance, give the guy a stake. I don't know why you want to hand this guy the keys to everything we own and say, help yourself. What about me? What about the guy that's tossed all his funds into this well, huh? The guy that could be a slash killer for all we know, and you're wanting to use our credit on him? Shut up, Ben. He shut up. Bird turned him loose and went over to talk to Mike at the bar. Mike stood there, scowling. Dekker was still sitting there with his mind bent, staring off into deep space. Meg was in the next chair talking to him. Sal was leaning over him, showing cleavage. He walked over to Dekker, laid a hand on his shoulder, ready to jump if Dekker wanted to throw a punch. He squeezed Dekker's shoulder, said casually, Hello there, Deck. Remember me? Ben Pollard. How are you doing? He flinched, and he could move. He turned his head very slowly to look up at Ben, remembering they were not in the ship. They were in a bar in a sleepery on R2, and he'd just punched Bird. He figured Ben wanted to punch him, but Ben wasn't doing it, because this was a public place. He said, Hello, Ben. He could almost come out of the haze. Ben was far clearer to him than the women had been. He was actually glad when Ben moved a chair and sat down, leaning into his face, holding his arm. Ben said, Well, how've you been, Dekker? Not good, he said, and, fighting to get back from where he was, he tried desperately to be civil so long as Ben was being. Maybe he had been crazy. Maybe Ben was honestly trying to start things over. You? We're fine. We're real fine. Sorry about the ship. He figured Ben was trying to make a point. He wasn't going to accept it. But a numbness gave him a self-control he wouldn't have had otherwise. Yeah, well, he said. Ben squeezed his arm. A little Z'd, are we? They gave me something. Dekker held up white plastic sacks. Ben took them from him. Prescription bottles showed through the plastic. I'm supposed to take those. Not all at once, Meg muttered. He's had enough damn pills and excessively too much beer. Man needs to get up and walk is what he needs. He thought, all right, let's keep people happy, give this guy a chance to show out how crazy he is. Poor little pet. So he stood up and pulled at Dekker. Come on, Dekker, on your feet. Walk the happy stuff off. Dekker didn't argue. He stood up. Ben got an arm around him before the knees went. The Pacific called. Bird came over to say. Seems he left his card there. They're holding it. Guy's got a card. Ben felt a little better then, hoping there was finance on it. Has he got a room there? No, I was working something out with Mike. Ben stopped, with his arms around Dekker. He thought, shit. And on that note, I definitely have to dip. Um, Thanks to anybody who tuned in. Hope you enjoyed. We're about halfway through the book. About halfway. I realize that some of these passages are kind of tough. Mostly it's the way some of the words are put. One of the way the sentences are put together can be a little tough when I'm doing this live, because like I haven't read the book in years, so it's not like I have it memorized. I have like a basic plot synopsis, and that's about it. In my head at any given time. So I'm like, this is me fessing up to the general the reading it aloud to a hypothetical audience live uh, background is I'm like always a line and a half ahead of wherever my mouth is, and that sometimes is causing me difficulty because some of these lines are not super easy unless you're on it word after word, and then trying to get character and tension out in the voices I've been kind of iffy on. So I do apologize. This stream was not me at my best. I would still say I'm doing better with this than I was for pretty much the entirety of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I still feel kind of bad about how that turned out. That doesn't mean I'll redo it, but like, I wasn't thrilled. I know it wasn't my best work. Snow Crash is still pretty close to the best I've done. That and Blind Sight. Um, Echopraxia felt a little shakier, partly because Echopraxia is a shaky book. That's a tough one. Blind Sight's a shaky book too, but like, man, it's a hell of a book. So yeah, I do this every week. If you want to tune in, catch me live every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time is when I'm streaming these. I usually give like a 5 minute leeway period begin in the beginning for people to tune in. Nobody really does, but that's okay. You're watching it after the fact on YouTube, probably. I do other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Right now, we're going through an old PS1 title, PlayStation 1 title called Remote Controlled Dandy, about somebody who remote controls a giant robot to save the world from other giant robots and other such threats. If anybody remembers a game on the PlayStation 2 called Robot Alchemic Drive, and I know some of you are out there, this is like its grandfather or its pappy. Technically, there's another game in the series, but I don't know when that one came out in relation to Robot Alchemic Drive. If you like EDF titles, this feels very much like a predecessor in a lot of ways. Um, in terms of like, here's a fairly large scale environment sandbox that you play in with a kind of with clunky play controls, deliberately clunky in order to make you think about what you're doing. You could also make an argument that there's similarities to Monster Hunter by the same logic, but I'm not going to go there. Um, Kind of in the same way you could make the logical leap that, oh, Phantasy Star Online is a natural direct predecessor to the original Phantasy Star Online is a natural direct predecessor to Monster Hunter. Um, but I think that's sort of a tough sell. There's, I think it's not unreasonable in the sense that there is a lot of conceptual overlap, but I don't know that any of the people who worked on that actually went and did that. Worked on one that worked on the other. Besides, one's Sega, one's Capcom. Other bits of spiel, right? I also have a Warframe Wednesday stream that I do every week at noon every Wednesday. It's Wednesday. Make them named. They're named relevant. It's not just onomatopoeia. No, that's not the one. Alliteration. It's not just alliteration. It's helps me remember what day I'm doing it on. Because sometimes the schedule gets kind of busy. And then, of course, Free Read Fridays, which you've just partaken partaken in. Isn't that nice? Where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud, such as this Heavy Time by C.J. Cherryh, however that's pronounced. I don't think I've ever heard her name spoken aloud by herself, so I don't know. Great author, highly recommend her. Very good. She has some good fantasy work she's done, like the Morgaine cycle. Um, oh, the Chanur series. Chanur, Chanur, Chanur. Those are quite good. I don't think I've ever read all of them though. I really need to get around to doing that someday. Someday I'll get around to that. Beyond that, hope people have a good week, or any amount of time. Stay safe, stay sane, stay well as best you can. Use appropriate precautions in crowded areas. I know things are nutty right now. Omicron being what it is. Just remember, just because it's not as lethal doesn't mean it isn't going to put your ass in a hospital. And the way the hospitals are getting right now, I am learning secondhand from some people I live with, well, in the same apartment building, who work in hospitals. It's kind of scary right now. Their resources are getting stretched. So do yourself a favor, do everyone else a favor, and I'll stop proselytizing now. Stay toasty as well. It's freaking cold out in a lot of the places in the continental United States, and I suppose maybe even Hawaii. I have no idea. I have no idea. I could look that up because the internet's a magical thing. Um, so yeah, hope people are digging. Have a good one, and see you next time. Well, I won't see you. You won't see me. I give you my solemn vow that you'll never have to see me on on a webcam ever, if I can help it. If you can help it. If anyone can help it. Can anyone help it? I can help it. Um, it can be avoided, and so it will. Alrighty, see you guys next time. Thanks again, and Goyles, I suppose. I assume. I hope. I hope everybody's enjoying these. I know I do. I'm rambling. My brain's not right. Alrighty, next time.